Welcome in, everybody, to the vaccine conversation with Melissa and Dr. Bob. I am Dr. Bob Sears, and here is Melissa. Say hi, Melissa.
Hi, Melissa.
All right.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa. Happy to be here. Happy to be having this conversation.
Yeah, and it's a very important conversation that I think a lot of people are not allowed to have for some strange reason. Like, it's the only thing in your pediatrician's office you're not allowed to talk about. And I don't know why that is.
Yeah, I think this topic has become extremely taboo. That's what I always say about it because, like you're saying, you can't talk about this in your doctor's office. You can't talk about this even with your friends for fear of judgment. It's become very socially unacceptable to talk about vaccines, especially to question them or to raise concerns, even just to have the dialogue. That's why I'm so glad we're doing this, because this is not about coming to conclusions. This is about having the conversation, letting the conversation be accessible to everyone and not feel badly about it, and hopefully come out with a clearer view of your belief system at the end of it.
Right, exactly. And it's kind of funny. I mean, you think about a podcast that's only about vaccines, and that's, all we're going to talk about vaccines. I mean, we'll talk about immunity and health and other aspects of natural, healthy living. But I think for the most part, this will be the vaccine conversation. And I don't know, as a doctor, I sometimes can be a little boring. I don't know when I'm talking about things. So that's one of the many reasons Melissa is here that you'll discover. She's
no comment.
She'll keep things fun and more lively. But anyway, I think this first episode. Well, welcome to the first episode, by the way, in case you didn't know.
And I have to. A little confession: I don't listen to podcasts. I've never actually listened to a podcast, but I know so many people that do, and I'm hoping this actually encourages me to check out other podcasts too. That seems to be sort of the wave of the future in communicating, easier for people to listen to on their way to work or on their way running errands and things. And so we're hoping just to have the conversation with you guys. And
yeah, I love podcasts. I listen to 4 or 5 different ones. They're a lot of fun. It's kind of sad that I don't listen to music as much anymore, but I love podcasts. I think it's a great way to reach people. And so I think, this very first podcast, we're basically just going to talk about why we are doing this podcast and why we need to do this podcast and why we think vaccines are an important thing to talk about. And I think probably one of the first issues, I guess, for new parents out there is they're looking for objective information. They can't find anything to read.
What does that mean? What does that mean to you? Objective. What does
Objective means neutral information that gives you both sides of an issue without an agenda, I would say. And I think if you're looking for books to read about vaccines, you either find books that are completely pro-vaccine, which really tell you there's no choice, you have to do them, and here's all the stuff you should know about it. Or there's books that are anti-vaccine. I tried to write a neutral book on vaccines, but I think a lot of parents are looking for maybe a more conversational approach to this. Like you said, something they can listen to as a podcast instead of spending a month reading a book. And I think that's where we're really going to take you, is just we're going to cover all kinds of different things. But
well, also I'll say, like, as a mom, as a parent a stay-at-home mom, it's really hard to devote so much time to the information that you need in this topic. Like, you don't have hours and hours. You don't even have the ability to have a drive to work to listen to a podcast because you're always working. And so I think one of the big challenges is this is probably one of the most important issues that a mother or parent faces and that they are surrounded by. And yet at the same time, it's really hard to delve into all of the information. It becomes overwhelming. It can be intimidating for a lot of people. And like you're saying, the information is so one-sided right now. So it's kind of like if anything doesn't go along with that particular narrative, then it's instantly something controversial. When what you're saying is it's just important to have the other side of it. You don't have to come to a conclusion, or you're not telling anybody what conclusion to come to, but just having both sides of it. An argument is sort of like the basis of any complicated issue. It seems sort of obvious that would be the case, but for some reason, when it comes to vaccines, it's really one-sided. It really is. And that's not my own personal opinion. That's just a fact. Like you're saying, the books that you come across are usually completely one-sided. The media coverage of this issue is very one-sided. Your pediatrician's office is one-sided. There really aren't both sides of this issue being discussed at all.
Right. And so, if you look at the kind of information you're supposed to read and learn about when you're trying to understand vaccines is, every vaccine that's made has about 20 pages of fine print that talk about all the risks and all the safety research and side effects. There's so much information there.
And what are those called?
Those are called the package inserts, and you can find them on the FDA website. Just go to their
And that's not
section.
something you're going to get at your pediatrician's office.
No.
I just want to put that out there, that when you think you're getting some information that he or she hands you at your child's well visit appointment, you're not actually getting the 20 pages of each vaccine that your child's being given that day. You're given the CDC
vaccine information statements,
which is how long?
Which are 2 pages of condensed information all about the pros and cons. But I think more importantly is why this. Again, let me rephrase that. To me, vaccines are not simple. Everyone looks at them as you just go to your checkup. You get all your shots, you go home, and everything's fine. It's the most simple, straightforward idea that people honestly don't even know that they should be even looking into this. Whereas a pediatrician, I know from 20 years of pediatrics, giving vaccines in my office, it is the single most complicated medical intervention your child will ever receive in his or her entire life.
And it's frequent.
The most complicated, yes. And it's all condensed into a very short period of time in childhood. And unless you're going to someday get chemotherapy or you're going to get some sort of, an organ transplant and be on all kinds of medications, vaccination is the single complicated invasive medical treatment. So why, if that's true, then why is it also the only thing you can't talk about? And so that's why we're here. We're going to talk about it. Ad nauseum, but again, we're going to try to keep it interesting and fun. And I think the main point is we're going to give you, we're going to walk you through all kinds of different aspects of vaccination, but you're not going to get everything you need to know in just 1 or 2 podcasts. Right. There's so much we're going to, if you're a new parent and you're just listening to this podcast and you want to find out about vaccines, we're going to ask you to basically walk with us, week after week, day after day, for months, even years, is going to take you to basically hear everything we have to say about vaccines as we continue to learn.
Well, and even if you are not a new parent and you're a parent who made up your mind based on your circumstantial experience, and there's still more information to learn consistently that reinforces what you believe, or that opens your eyes to a new aspect of something that you thought you already knew. And I think that's kind of my biggest gripe with the whole concept, which I'm sure we'll do an entire episode about this, but the whole concept of the science is settled. This whole idea that this is something that it's been done and it's done. And it's like as if it's complete, when obviously this is something that's constantly morphing. It's always changing. There's always new information. And the more information that we have, the more empowered that we are. And so we used to do town hall kind of speaking events on purpose to help inform people kind of about some of the other side of this. And I think parents, the only thing that they have on their side is information, because that's the only way that can arm them. Because a lot of times as a mom, you get the whole, you're not a doctor, so therefore your opinion is somehow invalid, or somehow it is subpar to the person who has the medical degree. But as we'll mention probably in another episode, and I feel like I'm going to say that about 100 times because I have a list of 70 topics that I want to talk about because this is so complex. But doctors, we know, people assume you have a medical degree, therefore you're completely experienced as when it comes to vaccine training. We know that's not true. But yet, if a parent voices some type of objection, any type of objection, it's usually received with so much criticism, so much disdain that the relationship between that parent and that doctor becomes compromised. Another episode. I have that written down. It's important. Parent-doctor relationship is important. But information is really the only thing that a parent has that can bring to the table to be able to have a one-on-one with your doctor, your health practitioner, and feel like, hey, let's make this decision together. And like what you're saying, most parents don't have the information. I know I certainly didn't before we came to the vaccine crossroads. I didn't have the information because I sort of just assumed the science was settled. The doctor would know this is what everybody does. I didn't even know of a family that did not vaccinate. I didn't know that was an option. I didn't know what it meant not to vaccinate. I just knew that you could get less at a time, but you definitely wouldn't not do any. Of course, why would you do that to yourself? It's such a simple procedure. And that's another thing we're going to talk about, right? Like, what is a vaccine and what does it do and what do people think it does compared to what it really does?
I mean, we could just talk for days and days and days, nonstop. I think we're going to try to break this down into half-hour segments, so spend a half hour with us, learn, as much as you can.
And I will say, Dr. Bob protested the half-hour thing. He's used to longer podcasts. But the reason, this was my suggestion, and I tell you this because I'm speaking on behalf of the stay-at-home parents and the parents that are always multitasking, they just don't have the long blocks of time to devote to listening to something that sometimes gets really complicated. It gets complex. The studies involve facts, data, all that kind of stuff. And so it's a lot easier if you can guarantee and invest 30 minutes to learn a little something. And if you happen to have an hour that day, you can check out 2 different episodes. And
another important reason why we're talking about this, and we've touched on this a bit already, is I know for a fact that here in Southern California, in Orange County, most doctors literally won't even talk to patients about this. You're actually not allowed to have this conversation. It's like, not only if you ask questions, is the doctor going to disagree with you, but that doctor literally won't even talk to you about vaccines, because if you don't do them all, you can't come to their office anymore. They'll kick you out. So why even have a conversation? So that's why we're here. We will have the conversation with you. We will talk to you about it. We'll talk to you about every risk, every possible benefit, because we don't want you to feel pressured. We don't want you to feel intimidated. We want to empower you to be able to make these decisions. And, if you decide to do some vaccines, you will have a doctor that will walk you through that. If you decide not to do vaccines, that's up to you, and you'll have to find a doctor that's willing to see you. Here in Orange County, it's hard to find such a doctor, but again, we're going to have the conversation, and I feel like it does a huge disservice to have a mandatory medical treatment in any medical office, 70 doses of vaccination that we'll talk about, to mandate that and give nobody a choice when federal law mandates informed consent. We'll talk about this too. There is an actual federal law that mandates that doctors give you a whole bunch of informed consent. Yeah, you sit there with your doctor in your office, that doctor won't answer a single question and says, you don't like vaccines or you have a question, get out of my office and come back when you're ready to do that. I think that's just so unfair. I
know our personal experience, our family, we were kicked out of an office just like that. So in our situation, and a little backstory on us, for those who don't know me, is we did vaccinate with a little hesitation, I will say. So we already wanted to do a reduced schedule kind of at the beginning, but that was enough already for my oldest, my daughter, who's now 5, to have reactions. And so she had reactions. And this is another thing we're going to cover, because reactions sometimes are a lot more subtle than people think, and people are expecting the hospital visit. And if you don't have the hospital visit, then you didn't have a reaction. But hers were definitely subtle, but over time, and they were consistent, and they were kind of cumulative. And at the time, our pediatrician was open to the reduced schedule. He was recommending what he thought were the minimum necessary. By the time we decided to stop vaccinating at that point, after she had even more reactions, after 12 months, the doctor, he changed his whole thing changed. And this was right before actually the bill was being introduced, 277. So this was, late 2014. And all of a sudden their office was, if you don't go along with this vaccine protocol, we will no longer serve you. And I had written to him extensively after every time she had a reaction. And, I felt like deep down he might have been open to this, but that his practice, whatever he was in, whatever medical group he's in, and of course I'm not going to name him, but whatever practice he was in, they made a majority decision that basically they will not allow any patients that are unvaccinated. So that left us in a position where we did not have care anymore. Now, what a lot of people with holistic families will tell you is they don't need to go to the doctor a lot. When you're healthy, that's kind of the idea. Luckily, you can go long periods of time.
No.
You don't need doctors. They're just money-making people.
That's crazy.
But if you have a healthy household, healthy children, you don't really need to see the doctor that often. So you can get by, going longer periods of time, luckily. But of course, that doesn't make you feel any less discriminated against. And that's something that we're going to talk about because it does seem almost unethical, and cruel to be able to discriminate on your patient based on the fact that they've had vaccine reactions already and they want to stop. They don't want to continue at this point. So that's a huge issue right now in this area where we are, and a lot of people are in that position, and that's something we definitely are going to talk about. Yeah,
and I look forward to talking about how I'll share maybe some stories about how I hear patients after they have a severe reaction that's actually listed in the warnings on the vaccine package insert, they have that reaction. Their doctor still kicks them out of the office because they refuse to do that vaccine again, even though the actual package insert says don't do this vaccine again. Doctors, they just have no idea.
Well, we definitely never got any package inserts. We were never even told about package inserts. Right. We assumed, just like everybody else, the 1 to 2 page information sheet that you do get was somehow all that we had to worry about. And that usually says like a fever, these are the one thing you need to look out for is a fever. So when we didn't have a fever, it was like, oh, we're fine. This is the only thing that was the problem. But of course, once you get the package insert, you realize like it's so extensive and the potential risks are there. Not to say that's going to happen to everybody, but the point is they're there and they're not being discussed. So that was always my big issues. I felt extremely lied to. I felt like information was withheld from me, and I felt like it was a type of betrayal. Now, in our case, and it turned into a vaccine reaction from not having that information, and not just mine, but thousands of families, even just in our state. And so I think the biggest reason that I'm motivated to continue talking about this is I want parents to have the information that I did not have to make whatever choice works for them, but just to even have the information so that they're not blindsided when something happens out of the blue, like what's side effects, like I didn't even know this could happen. And not only can it happen, but the manufacturers are telling you, yes, this happens. And they're also telling doctors, you are required to go over this. I mean, we've talked about the package inserts before where it actually says, doctors, you are required to go over this information with your patient. And it never happens, not once, like never. And if you were to ask your doctor about that, they're so offended that you could even ask that they're like, what, you don't trust my judgment and my medical degree? You're just a mom. And then it kind of goes in that same cycle. And then people stop asking. And it's a really sad dynamic.
There's people always talk about the science. The science is settled. Here's what the science says. But I'll tell you, as a pediatrician, there's a huge disconnect between science and what most pediatricians do. As you just said, Melissa, all the science shows for a fact that there are very severe vaccine reactions that can happen. We know for some of them how often they happen, how likely they are to happen. There's huge lists of severe side effects. That's what science says. Now you ask any pediatrician and they say, impossible. No, these vaccine reactions do not happen. Mm-hmm. They don't happen. They're 100% coincidence.
And they never will happen. Like it's as
correct.
If this is never going to happen because it never has, it never will. Any association is weird. But what I don't get about that is I feel like the entire world agrees that medicine can have side effects for some people. Like the entire world would say yes to that. Pharmaceutical products, the one-size-fits-all approach, we'll talk about that, but medicine has side effects for some people. Vaccines are a pharmaceutical product just like any other medication. There is no difference between why there are side effects for some people, and yet this entire group of, I call pro-mandate people, the people that support mandates, the people that are just completely adamant and say vaccine reactions don't exist, they're denying the fact that it's even possible for there to be side effects. But it's just like if you had an antidepressant drug and you are saying, I'm having these side effects, nobody would think twice. They'd say, oh my God, that's terrible. Let's switch you. But when it comes to vaccines, it's like, well, no, that whatever you're having, that's not connected to this. The timing is just unfortunate. It's not and they make you feel, of course, stupid for even asking and it's almost like, and don't ask again. Don't say it again. There's that. Yeah,
even though seizure is listed on the list of warning about reactions, it just so happened your child had a seizure the night that you got vaccines. Right. It's 100% coincidence.
It's just the timing.
It's a huge disservice. And I think that's honestly why I think a lot of parents realize that they're not getting objective information from their doctors, and that's why they are turning.
I swear, I don't feel like
sources.
I just don't know how many parents understand. Like, I don't know how many parents really have taken the time to realize how one-sided the information is. Yes, the people who we've spoken to, people who have had these kind of situations in their family, like mine, we're forced to learn about this kind of the hard way. But I know so many other moms, like in baby wearing or in other communities, that it's almost like it just hasn't even crossed their minds to think that the information that they've received could possibly be one-sided. There could possibly be some kind of agenda behind it or narrative behind it. Or it could be, like what I'm realizing more than anything, like part of a PR program. Like it's part of a marketing campaign. And that's why you keep hearing the same information over and over and over, because these are, it's essentially designed to make sure people feel a certain way about it. And that's something that I know we're also going to talk about because it's so crucial to understand. Yeah, and I look forward to sharing with you guys the World Health Organization's 30-page guide to PR training for any doctor who wishes to talk about vaccines in public. They actually don't want doctors to talk about vaccines in public unless you are media trained to do it. They have a guide for it because they're very careful about what you should say about vaccines and how you should say it, what your body language should be like, and isn't that like your mannerisms. Isn't that worrisome? Like, I mean, anything that needs... Because there's no PR guide to talking about chemotherapy. There's no... Or the antidepressant drugs or whatever. There's no PR guide to talking to your patients about antidepressants or giving a talk in public about nutrition. No, again, when it comes to vaccines... that always makes me wonder what intentions could be. Like, if you're so worried about what somebody would say... what are you potentially hiding? Like, what is it that you don't want people to know that you have to make sure it's completely filtered before it's out there to the public? Well, honestly, I think the mainstream medical community is worried that if patients do read all the informed consent and they do read the possible side effects and they do read the CDC vaccine information statements that federal law mandates, they're worried that more people will be concerned about side effects and that fewer people will vaccinate. And then you have to ask, though, but does that take away your right to get that informed consent? Well, right. No, it doesn't. Just like one thing you still have the right. Yeah, just like we're going to talk about in another future episode about that DPT documentary, which was so interesting to me. Yeah. But the representative from the FDA said, of course we're not going, you could tell he didn't mean to say this, but he said, of course we're not going to tell parents all of the side effects. They would not want to come in for vaccines. Right. And in him just saying that is admitting that they're censoring information so that they make sure that the action step goes in accordance with what they want from people. They want everybody to vaccinate for what they think is the greater good. This is what they want to happen. So they need to continue on a certain narrative to make sure that people go in that direction. And I'm sure these focus groups have been done hundreds of times to know exactly what makes parents doubt things and what makes them feel confident in this program. And so they're doing all the things that have turned out to make parents confident in the vaccine program, right? They do all the things that they need. So there is no doubt, because doubt is dangerous, right? People have doubt. They're wondering, well, what if there are risks to this? What if this actually is a dangerous option for my child? What if it's not as effective as they said it was? And what does that mean for us? And what does that mean for the vaccine program? Yeah, that makes me kind of uncomfortable knowing as a doctor that people are not just sharing objective, straightforward medical information about vaccines. There actually is an entire PR media campaign that's very carefully thought out, that's targeted in trying to get people to comply with it 100%. And not just action, but to feel a certain way about it. Right. So not and to feel a way about people who don't do it. Totally. The whole thing is so instead of just getting you to go get your flu shot, that's not enough. They want you to feel confident about getting your flu shot and uncomfortable with those who don't.
Right.
Yeah, they're essentially creating this entire mindset and belief system, and people don't know it's happening. That's the thing I think is so tough, is that it's so subconscious, just like any kind of marketing and advertising is. Like, you don't think that these products that they sell that do really, really well haven't gone through this rigorous process of focus groups also, where they're trying to find out what gets people hooked, what makes people love the brand. It's no different with what they're doing in this situation. I mean, anytime you have commercials for a vaccine, I mean, like, what does that say other than the people don't feel so confident about this on their own? They need a push, right? Like, we need to spend millions of dollars advertising, or in these stores right now. So it's, the beginning of flu season, and you see everywhere. Like, I was at Costco and there's like a lady wearing a sign like around her neck. I mean, like, it was really uncomfortable for me to watch just because she's wearing a wooden sign around her neck. But it said flu shot. She's the greeter that checks your card when you first come in. And it said flu shot, $19. And it's gotten to the point where they have to advertise so strongly.
Oh, no, you forgot to mention the $5 off coupon.
Well, not at Costco, because everything's already, wholesale price. But at CVS, you'll see like $5, get 20% off your whole entire order when you get your flu shot. And there's so much incentive. I always wonder if something's working. If something's working by itself, if people believe in it and believe in a need for it, you wouldn't need to market it, right? You wouldn't need to advertise. It feels so desperate to me.
Right, and that's a really fun topic, again, that we'll talk about, why they have to advertise the flu shot. And there's a lot of very, I think, fascinating things behind that.
It might take 2 episodes to cover the flu, because it's such a big topic.
And we got to do that soon because it's flu season now. So we'll get to that eventually. Hang in there. But I want to touch real quick on just for new parents, again, why we're talking about this is that the vaccine schedule is expanding so dramatically. We've talked about this for years now. Being up to date with vaccines today for someone born now is a completely different thing than what it meant a generation ago and in a generation before that. And I love seeing these Facebook pictures where it's a grandma, a mom, and a child, and they're all holding signs, "I'm fully vaccinated." Grandma had like 5 vaccines. Mom had, born maybe in the 80s, would have had about 24 vaccines. Children born today have 69 or 70 vaccine doses. Each one of those is fully vaccinated. But look what's happened. It's expanded. It's tripled since the 80s. And are we going to have, 200 vaccines some year? If they're all 100% safe and effective, there really should be no limit on how many we can do. And I think that mindset is why you, the new parent, should be listening to this podcast, because I think you need to know what's happening and understand the risks.
Well, I don't think most parents know the vaccine schedule. Like, I don't think if you asked any parent, I can't imagine most parents who vaccinate according to what their pediatrician recommends has any clue how many doses their child is getting.
No, we've always said they think it's just a few shots.
Well, right. And so and one of the things that we say, it's more than a few shots. So when you hear people say, just get your kid vaccinated, like, how hard is it? Just vaccinate. What's wrong with you? They assume, let's say this is during some measles scare or something, like, that's one vaccine. So you would assume, you say to yourself, like, why don't people just get their measles shot? Like, it's that, of course they don't offer the measles shot by itself anymore. It's only in combination. And that's only one of the other, dozens of doses that are required. So when you're saying to somebody, get your kid vaccinated, what you're saying is do what your doctor's recommending, and what they're recommending is the CDC schedule. But people don't understand that means, as of 2018, 69 doses of vaccines by the time that you're 18. And I think most parents, if they're new parents listening to this, or not new parents, but maybe somebody gave them a link to this and they want to check it out, they don't understand that's what their kid got if their kid has been born in the recent years.
And half of those 69 doses are grouped into the first year alone.
Right. And because there are these multiple injections. Like, people don't understand that when you get the 3 jabs, that still could be 8 doses of vaccines. And you might think, well, they're combined. It's not that big of a deal. And it is a big deal just because of the other stuff that's in there. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that.
Yeah, a whole episode on that. Talk about pharma. I want to ask you, Melissa, can you trust any type of pharma-sponsored information? Can you trust it?
Stop it. That's such a terrible question. Like, obviously, you know what I'm going to say. And the reason I say that is because of what we've already mentioned, the fact that you're advertising something, there's so much money behind this. And I think anybody knows, people say follow the money. Anybody knows when money's involved, morals tend to go out the window. Like, I don't know if that's something you've known your whole adult life. I think it took me a while to really understand that there's such thing as conflict of interest or corruption. And I don't just mean with vaccines. I mean across the board. All these huge organizations like tobacco organizations, the dairy farmers, all these big organizations that have been putting millions and millions into lobbying to get things passed. It's like behind what you think is all for the good of the people is some type of agenda that is motivated by money. And I think we're in an age now, after several scandals with pharmaceutical companies, we're in an age now where people would pretty much agree, I think almost everybody would agree, that pharmaceutical companies would put profits in front of your family. And that's the thing that I often ask people. Do you think that pharmaceutical companies are putting your family's health and well-being before their own bottom line or their own profit? I think most people would say, I doubt it. I doubt it. I mean, we know there have been, hundreds of lawsuits that pharmaceutical companies have had to pay in the millions of dollars for wrongful death and injuries.
But it's not to say that pharmaceutical companies are bad. I mean, there are for-profit companies. I mean, they're out to make a living and support their shareholders and their companies. I mean, they have every right to make all the money they can, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I think what people need to know is that doesn't mean they're putting your family's well-being before their profits.
But I mean, I don't know.
As a company, they're putting their profits first as they feel like they have our well-being, an interest.
I'm going to disagree with what you said, though, because you said you don't think it's bad, obviously, that they're for-profit companies. The problem becomes when for-profit starts to override their sense of ethical responsibility.
That's fair. Yeah.
And I think that the problem that we have now is money becomes one of these motivating factors. It literally keeps information from coming to the public. It literally gets people out of their jobs that might be willing to come forward with information. Like, money has now, when it gets to be in this level of money, we're talking the billions essentially for full-on programs here, that this kind of money totally trumps anybody's moral compass or their guide for what is right and wrong. And of course, as a citizen of, whatever country that you live in, you are counting on your government and your government to oversee companies to make sure that kind of negligence isn't happening, that kind of abuse isn't happening. And yet, in this situation, we find out these agencies and these companies are so much working together that that's part of why you don't get the objective information in the first place.
And I think for me personally, where they cross the line is I mean, you can make all the money you want. You can say your product is safe. But when you then get our government to make your product mandatory, that's where I think they cross a huge line. And that's
ethically.
Yeah, ethically. Yeah. And that's what I have a huge problem with is mandatory vaccination laws. And that's a lot about what we were talking about here.
But I think we're almost out of time for this first episode. So I know we have so much to cover. And the good news is this is just the beginning, and we have a lot to say, and we want to hear from people. We want to be able to hear what concerns are, and we're going to have people calling in, being a part of this program with us in the future. And I'm really excited to go deeper on some of these issues. I'm excited to let this conversation become more open, and hopefully people will be excited to be a part of it with us.
Yeah, I know. I mean, what I love is I love talking about vaccines. I literally could talk and write and speak about them all day long. And I think if you're going to spend time in your life doing something outside your job and donating your time to do something for the good of other people, it's wonderful when you love doing that. Mm-hmm. I mean, I couldn't sit here and talk about nutrition all day long or heart health or just general medicine. I got to be passionate and love what we're talking about. And I think that's what personally is going to be so much fun for me, Melissa, is just chatting back and forth, talking about these things for,
And
couple
vaccines
hours.
can be boring. Like I
Yes,
just have disclaimer, it can be boring. And that's kind of why I'm so interested in what's beyond that in the larger
Right.
conversation. So we'll have both aspects to it, which I think is going to work
we
really
need
well.
like a couch in here that you can take a nap on or something when I start talking like about like a disease or, read. I'll sit here and read the package insert to people
goodness.
and you can have a quick nap. Anyway, so, well, yeah, I appreciate you guys listening to our
thanks for
very
listening.
first episode. And I don't know what's next. What do you want to talk about next?
You know what?
We'll give you a little teaser.
Okay, I think
So
we
you tune
should.
in
You know
next
what?
time.
We should go right into the media sound bites. I think that is
Ooh, that's a
just so
fun one.
interesting. The catchphrases that you hear in the media regarding this issue. What are they? Why are they there? Why is this important? And what you need to look out for.
All right. Okay,
All right,
guys.
we'll see you guys next time.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
We're gonna be the peace we wanna see in the world. Yeah, be the peace we wanna see in the world. Yeah, be the love we wanna see in the world. Be the joy we wanna see in the world. Be the change we wanna see in the world.
The information in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. It is not intended as medical advice. Always consult your healthcare professional for information on vaccines and infectious diseases.